Airports are supposed to be anonymous. Faces, blur, names, don't matter. But the second I heard that voice at gate C12, my neighborhood nightmare suddenly had a boarding pass. Victoria Harlow, our HOA's crown-wielding tyrant, was dressed like power on sale and demanding my seat 2 amperes as if the aisle were her driveway. I was deadheading in plain clothes, just another traveler with a ticket and a timetable. Then the weather radar lit up like a bruise, and Victoria started working the room, calls, whispers, pointed glances. When a slick man in a too shiny suit accidentally bumped a flight attendant and his hand vanished near her bag, my pilot's brain snapped to full alert. Details don't lie, a wrong click, an unsecured latch, a phone camera held just so. This wasn't about legroom. It was logistics. Get this aircraft on the ground here tonight, no matter who had to be scared, diverted, or endangered to make her HOA vote happen. Before we dive in, drop a comment with where you're watching from and your local time right now. The thing about being a pilot is that even when you're not in uniform, you don't stop thinking like one. Details matter. Every flicker of a light, every shift in tone, every twitch in someone's body language, it all paints a bigger picture. And sitting there at gate C12, I knew I wasn't just watching a petty argument over seating. I was watching the prelude to something much uglier. Victoria Harlow wasn't a stranger to me. Back home in Cedar Grove, she was the queen bee of our HOA, the kind of woman who would send violation letters if your grass grew half an inch too tall. I had been on the receiving end of her corrections more than once. A faded welcome mat at my doorstep had earned me a $75 fine. A temporary basketball hoop for my son had cost me another. But those were just annoyances compared to what I was starting to suspect. At the gate, her voice carried like a chainsaw through glass. "You don't understand, I need that seat." She leaned across the counter, glaring at the gate agent, Brenda, who had the kind of weary patience only decades of experience could buy. I stayed seated, eyes on my phone, but my ears were locked in. The entitlement oozed from every syllable. Brenda didn't flinch. "Ma'am, seat 2 amperes is already assigned. Your boarding pass shows 3B. Calm, unmoved. Like telling a toddler that bedtime wasn't negotiable. But Victoria wasn't a toddler. She was a seasoned manipulator, and she never asked twice, she demanded. "I'm a platinum member. You can move him. Medical reasons." She pressed a hand dramatically to her hip, as if a sudden limp might appear on cue. I nearly laughed. The only thing injured here was her ego. I shifted my gaze down at my boarding pass. 2 amperes. First class. It was mine, no mistake. A small perk of the job when I deadhead a seat that meant I could stretch my legs before commanding a flight the next morning. It wasn't luxury, it was practicality. And I wasn't about to let her steamroll me, not here, not at 37,000 feet. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Emily, my wife. "Emergency HOA vote tonight. Victoria's pushing zoning approval again. Says it's urgent." My stomach sank. The same woman shrieking at the gate agent was simultaneously pulling strings back home. It was too much to be coincidence. I typed back quickly, "Funny you mention her. She's trying to steal my seat right now." Emily's reply came fast, a single exploding head emoji. When you've flown planes through lightning storms, dodged unpredictable crosswinds, and watched passengers panic at 30,000 feet, you think you've seen stress. But I promise you, the raw chaos of an entitled HOA president, bent on bending the world to her, will carry its own kind of turbulence. The gate supervisor arrived, a man with sagging shoulders and a clipboard. He repeated Brenda's words, almost verbatim. "Ma'am, the seat is taken. You can take your assigned 3B or be rebooked tomorrow." That was the checkmate. Still, Victoria didn't retreat gracefully. She hissed, yanked her boarding pass back, and spun around, eyes scanning the room like a predator searching for prey. That's when her gaze locked on me. She didn't know I was a pilot. She didn't know I had a front row seat to her tantrum. But she knew I was in possession of the thing she wanted. Her stare promised retribution. I'd seen it before when she fined my neighbor Susan for hanging wind chimes, when she tried to shut down a community barbecue because someone grilled without HOA-approved propane tanks. It was the same expression, "I will get you." Boarding was called, and I let the crowd shuffle forward before I stood. Better to blend in. Better not to draw attention. As I stepped onto the jet bridge, the air shifted. The sterile hum of the airport faded into the close recycled smell of the aircraft. I stowed my small roller bag overhead, slid into 2 amperes, and pulled out a paperback thriller I didn't intend to read. My instincts were already on red alert. Minutes later, Victoria swept down the aisle like a storm cloud in heels. She paused at my row, her lips curling when she saw the number 2 amperes. Me. She made a point of sighing loudly, forcing her oversized carry-on beneath the seat in front of her in 3B right behind my shoulder. Every shove of her bag felt like a shove at me. The rest of first class filled quietly. A businessman in a navy suit, a couple on their honeymoon clinking champagne glasses, a grandmother knitting serenely. Normal passengers on a normal flight. At least it should have been. Then came the man with the ring. I noticed him instantly. Expensive suit, a shade too shiny shoes, polished within an inch of their life, a heavy gold ring catching the cabin light like a signal flare. His boarding pass said economy, but he lingered in first class, pacing by the forward galley while talking urgently on his phone. He bumped into Sarah, one of the younger flight attendants, almost sending her sprawling. His hand, the one with the ring, disappeared briefly near her open tote bag. It was a blink and miss it motion. But I didn't miss it. Pilots don't. It wasn't clumsy, it was deliberate. I didn't leap to conclusions, not yet. But when he sauntered off toward the back, smiling slickly, my gut twisted. Something had been planted. I leaned back, letting the engine's rising whine vibrate through the cabin. As we pushed back from the gate, I stared out at the runway lights cutting through the night. Most passengers thought the storm gathering on the horizon was the biggest threat we'd face. But sitting in 2 amperes with Victoria behind me, and the memory of that ringed hand near a flight attendant's bag, I knew better. The real storm wasn't outside the aircraft, it was already on board. Flying in plain clothes is supposed to feel like a break. No cockpit, no responsibility, just a seat and a ticket like anyone else. But for me that night, anonymity turned into the heaviest disguise I'd ever worn. From the moment we lifted off, I could feel the storm, both the one flashing beyond the windows and the one brewing inside this cabin closing in. Victoria Harlow leaned forward in 3B, close enough that I could smell the sharp tang of her perfume like overripe citrus. She tapped furiously at her phone, her screen glowing in the dimmed cabin lights. Every few seconds she smirked as though each text she fired off was a carefully placed chess piece. My phone buzzed again. Emily had been tracking the HOA's online page while I boarded. Victoria's forcing the emergency vote at 9. Barely anyone knows about it. Half the neighborhood's out of town. I stared at those words, and a chill slid down my spine. This wasn't just an entitled woman grabbing for extra legroom. This was logistics, timing, precision, a woman with no boundaries using the world like a chessboard. And apparently, she was willing to drag an entire aircraft into the match. I typed quickly, "She's here, on my flight, something's wrong." Emily's reply came faster than I could blink. "Be careful, I'll dig." I pocketed my phone and glanced sideways at the galley. Sarah, the young attendant, was tucking her tote into an overhead bin, rearranging bags to make space. I knew exactly which bag she'd been carrying, the one the ringed stranger brushed against. My pulse ticked faster. The engines roared as the plane surged down the runway. I felt the powerful thrust push us back into our seats. To most, it was routine, the beginning of a journey. To me, every sound was a diagnostic. The whine of the engine steady, the clatter of the landing gear retracting clean. No problems with the plane itself. But the cabin was another story. As the seatbelt sign blinked off, passengers relaxed into their routines. Laptops flipped open, earbuds, plugged in, drink orders taken. But I couldn't relax. I knew the look of someone who thought they'd outsmarted the system, and Victoria wore it like a crown. Half an hour into the flight, the first turbulence hit. A shudder rattled the plane, the overhead bins creaking. Nervous murmurs filled the air. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm, measured, professional. "Folks, we're crossing into some weather. Please return to your seats and fasten your belts." That was when I heard the first sharp ding. Victoria had pressed the call button. Repeatedly, the frantic, insistent chime drew a flight attendant to her row. "There's something wrong with this man," she cried, gesturing wildly at the passenger beside her. He was slumped slightly, eyes half-lidded, skin pale. From a distance, it looked like distress. But up close, the performance stank of theater. His breathing was steady. His pulse, I guessed, was normal. This wasn't a collapse. It was an act. The attendants moved quickly, unbuckling the man, laying him into the aisle, calling for medical professionals. A nurse from economy rushed forward. The aisle became chaos, equipment pulled from cabinets, oxygen mask readied. And through it all, Victoria narrated the scene into her phone, her camera angled just so, broadcasting her version of incompetence to whoever would listen. The timing was too perfect. The turbulence, the fainting act, the loud commentary. It was all working toward one inevitable outcome, a diversion. Airlines don't land short without reason. A real medical emergency will do it. Severe weather will do it. But here the combination was scripted. My gut twisted. If we diverted, there was only one airport within range big enough to take us Cedar Grove International. Our home airport, exactly where Victoria needed to be for that vote. My training screamed, don't react, observe, collect, decide later. So I watched the way Victoria hovered over the patient, barking unhelpful instructions. Watched her steal glances at her phone between her cries for help. Watched how she flinched, not when the man groaned, but when the captain's voice came back on the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, due to a medical emergency on board and to avoid deteriorating weather, we'll be diverting. Estimated landing 30 minutes. The words hit the cabin like a shockwave. Some passengers gasped, others whispered. Victoria clasped her hands together dramatically, as though in relief. But I knew better. That expression wasn't relief. It was victory. I leaned back, staring at the overhead bin above row 3. I thought of the ringed man's clumsy bump, his hand disappearing for just 2 seconds. I thought of Sarah's tote bag now crammed in with passenger luggage. I thought of the strange click I'd heard when the turbulence rattled the bins. It wasn't just about getting Victoria home on time. Something else was riding with us. Something dangerous. The plane shuddered again, dropping suddenly as it cut through a pocket of rough air. Drinks spilled, someone screamed. The patient groaned theatrically. The nurse insisted he was stable, breathing fine, but Victoria waved her phone like a weapon. He'll die if we don't land now, she shrieked. I kept my eyes trained on that bin, and then I heard it. A faint metallic tick, the wrong kind of click. Not the latch of a properly secured bin, but the loose chatter of something not locked in place. That was enough. I unbuckled, braced myself against the rocking cabin, and slipped forward to the galley, where Maria, the lead flight attendant, sat strapped into her jump seat. She frowned. "Sir, you need to sit down." I kept my voice low. Row 3. Right overhead bin. The latch didn't sound right. Something's not secured. I didn't say more. Didn't flash credentials. Just gave her data. Pilots live on data. Her eyes widened for a split second before she unbuckled gripping handholds as she moved down the aisle. She pressed the latch. It gave instantly. The door swung down, revealing Sarah's tote exactly where I'd feared. She shoved it closed again, sealing it with a loud, definitive snap. Then she turned back her eyes, meeting mine with unspoken understanding. This wasn't turbulence. This wasn't coincidence. This was design. As the storm outside crackled and the plane banked toward Cedar Grove, I knew the truth. Victoria hadn't just hijacked a seat. She'd hijacked the entire flight, and we were all strapped in for the ride. The strange thing about flying is how quickly the ordinary can tip into the extraordinary. One moment you're sipping water and listening to the low hum of the engines. The next, every nerve in your body is screaming that something is wrong. That's what it felt like the instant Maria, the lead flight attendant, confirmed my suspicion. The latch on the bin had been loose, and the bag inside was the same one touched by that ringed stranger. I watched Maria's face harden into calm professionalism as she pushed the bin shut. She gave me the tiniest nod, a silent acknowledgement that she'd seen enough to know this wasn't just paranoia. But she didn't shout. She didn't panic. She slipped back to her jump seat, picked up the interphone, and started speaking in the clipped, coded language of airline crews handling emergencies. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught enough. Possible device level 2 secure cabin. The cabin lights dimmed further as the turbulence intensified. Outside, lightning flashed across the clouds, painting the inside of the aircraft in harsh strobing light. The passengers gasped with every jolt, every sudden drop. But I kept my eyes fixed on Victoria. She was still performing for her phone, whispering dramatic commentary to her live stream. "The crew has lost control," she told her invisible audience, her voice shaking with theatrical panic. "We're in real danger." It was infuriating. The very people keeping her safe, the ones calmly handling a storm both inside and outside the aircraft, were being painted as incompetent fools. I wanted to shout at her, but I didn't. I couldn't. My training drilled into me, never escalate chaos with more chaos. So I stayed silent, watching, recording every detail in my mind. That's when the cabin shifted. 2 attendants moved deliberately toward row 3, their steps measured even in the turbulence. They reached up and with exaggerated care pulled Sarah's tote from the overhead bin. The sight made my heart pound harder. They carried it down the aisle like it was made of glass, heading toward the rear of the aircraft. That was procedure, the LRBL, or least risk bomb location. If you ever needed proof of how seriously they were taking this, that was it. Passengers craned their necks, whispering nervously. They didn't know what was happening, but the tension was contagious. A mother clutched her child tighter. A businessman folded his laptop and muttered a prayer. And just a few rows back in 14C, I noticed something that shifted the equation again. A man in a plain gray jacket paperback open on his lap was watching the attendants with a predator's stillness. He wasn't pretending to be calm. He wasn't panicking. He was tracking the bag with laser focus. Then I saw it. The subtle adjustment of posture, the readiness in his body. He wasn't a civilian. He was an air marshal. Relief flickered in me for a moment. At least there was another set of trained eyes, someone armed, someone with authority. But relief quickly gave way to dread. If the marshal was locked in, then the threat was real. The turbulence worsened. The plane jolted violently, sending the unsecured service cart rolling down the aisle. Time slowed. I saw a little boy unbuckled, reaching for a toy directly in its path. Instinct took over. I lunged, bracing my shoulder as the metal beast slammed into me. Pain shot through my bones, but I shoved the cart sideways, pinning it against the bulkhead. The boy's mother screamed, clutching her son as I tightened his belt. "Stay put, little man," I growled, my voice harsher than intended. The mother's tearful thank yous blurred into the background as attendants scrambled to secure the rogue cart. Maria looked at me from the galley, her eyes wide with both fear and gratitude. "Thank you," she mouthed. I just shook my head. Part of the job. Even if I wasn't on duty, I couldn't switch off that part of me. The interphone chirped again. Maria listened, nodded, then announced quietly to her team. "Cockpit says lock it down." Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed the truth. This was no drill. Behind me, Victoria shifted in her seat, clearly restless. She tried to catch a flight attendant's attention, but they ignored her. She wasn't the priority anymore. For once in her life, she wasn't the center of power. And that, I realized, was driving her mad. The attendants moved with swift precision, carrying Sarah's bag to the rear. They began layering water-soaked blankets and soft luggage around it, creating a makeshift buffer. I couldn't see the details from my seat, but I knew the procedure by heart. Every airline trained for this, hoping they'd never have to use it. Tonight they did. The air marshal rose from his seat, moving casually but deliberately toward the back. To everyone else, he was just another passenger stretching his legs. To me, he was a shadow slipping into position. And then, over all of it, Victoria's voice pierced the cabin. "They're panicking," she hissed into her phone, angling it toward the attendants. "No one knows what they're doing. This could be the end." I clenched my jaw so hard it ached. She was framing the heroes as villains, twisting the story in real time. And her smugness only grew when the captain's voice returned, edged with tension. "Due to worsening weather and a medical emergency, we're diverting immediately," passengers murmured. Victoria smiled. She thought she'd won. She thought the storm outside and the staged chaos inside had bent the world to her will. But she didn't know what I knew: the device wasn't planted for show. It had a purpose. And if it activated mid-descent, with lightning slashing the skies around us, her victory would turn into everyone's tragedy. The plane rattled again, dropping hard enough to send stomachs lurching. Overhead bins shuddered. I heard another faint click metal against plastic, and my pulse roared in my ears. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. If you've ever flown through a thunderstorm, you know the sound. The fuselage groaning like an old ship, rain hammering the windows in relentless sheets, flashes of lightning so bright they blind you for half a heartbeat. But for me, sitting in 2 amperes with Victoria, just one row behind the real storm, wasn't the weather. It was the calculated chaos unfolding around us. The medical emergency had been neatly staged. The supposed victim was now lying in the aisle, moaning faintly, while a nurse and 2 flight attendants worked over him. His pulse was steady, his breathing normal, yet Victoria kept pushing her phone into people's faces, insisting he was on the brink of death. She waved her arms dramatically whenever turbulence hit, gasping like she was narrating a disaster movie. "Do you see this?" she shrieked into her live stream. "The airline is failing us. This man needs a hospital." Her words weren't just noise, they were calculated. She wanted passengers to panic, to pressure the crew to justify the diversion. And when the captain finally announced we were rerouting, her smug little smile said it all: the plan was working. But that's when my phone buzzed again. It was Emily. Developer bragging at HOA meeting livestream, says vote will pass when Victoria arrives. He already scheduled a victory party tonight. I stared at the message, my jaw tightening. So it was true. The storm, the medical ruse, the chaos, it was all to get Victoria home in time to cast a deciding vote. One woman's obsession with power, backed by a greedy developer, had turned 180 souls on this aircraft into pawns. I glanced toward the rear. Maria and her crew were still working the procedure surrounding Sarah's tote, with blankets isolating it as best they could. My gut churned. If it was a jammer, as I suspected, we'd be flying blind on approach. If it was worse, something with teeth, then every second counted. And then the cabin lurched. A violent downdraft slammed us downward, trays rattling, drinks flying. A scream tore through the rows as passengers gripped armrests. For a few seconds, it felt like we were on a roller coaster, plunging into darkness. I forced my breathing steady. Pilots know turbulence, we live in it. But this had layers. The patient in the aisle groaned theatrically, clutching his chest. The nurse leaned over him, frowning. "He's fine," she said firmly. "Pulse normal. Oxygen levels are stable. He's not having a heart attack." Victoria ignored her. "He's dying," she wailed into her phone. "We need to land now." She was already twisting the narrative, building her case for an emergency that didn't exist. But what chilled me wasn't her theatrics. It was the sound I heard next, a faint, irregular metallic tick from the overhead. The wrong kind of click, not from turbulence, but from something unsettled. My body stiffened. I glanced up. Row 3. That cursed bin again. Lightning illuminated the cabin for a split second, and I saw the bin flexing just slightly with the motion of the plane. The latch wasn't holding. The device, whatever it was, sat inside waiting. I rose halfway, gripping the seatbacks, as the plane bucked again. Maria caught my eye instantly. She moved toward the cockpit interphone, whispering fast. Within moments, her expression darkened into grim resolve. The order came through loud enough for me to hear. "Secure the cabin. LRBL protocol confirmed." Passengers fidgeted as flight attendants moved briskly down the aisle, checking belts, securing carts. Their professionalism was a mask, but I could see the truth in their eyes, fear tightly caged by training. That's when I noticed the man in gray, the air marshal. He had slipped closer to the rear, shadowing the attendants carrying Sarah's tote. His hand rested near his hip under his jacket where his weapon waited. His eyes scanned the rows, pausing briefly on Victoria. He knew. And Victoria. She was still grinning, live streaming, relishing the drama she had created. Her confidence was terrifying because it meant she believed she had the outcome under control. The descent began. The engines shifted pitch as the plane banked hard lightning, flashing brighter rain, battering the fuselage like handfuls of gravel. The captain's voice returned steadier than I expected under the circumstances. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing shortly. Remain seated with your belts fastened." But I could hear the subtle strain in his tone. He knew the risks of descending into a storm with a compromised cabin. He knew his crew was handling something far bigger than a fainting passenger. The passengers clutched their armrests tighter as turbulence worsened. The supposed patient groaned louder, then suddenly sat up straight, her eyes darting nervously as though the act was slipping. The nurse shook her head in disgust. "You're faking," she muttered. But Victoria raised her phone higher. "Look, he can barely sit upright. They're ignoring him. I'd had enough." I leaned sideways just enough for her to hear me. "You're not helping him, Victoria. You're helping yourself." Her eyes narrowed, venom flashing across her face. For a moment she looked like she wanted to scream at me, but then she tilted her chin smugly, as though my words had confirmed her dominance. The plane jolted again, a bone-rattling shudder that sent several passengers crying out. Overhead, the suspect bin creaked audibly. I gritted my teeth. One more big jolt and that thing might swing open. Maria's voice came over the intercom, smooth as silk despite the chaos. "Ladies and gentlemen, for your safety, please stay seated. Our crew is conducting final checks." Final checks. Translation: the bag was being secured at the LRBL. The procedure was underway. But I knew deep in my gut that we weren't out of danger. Not yet. The storm outside was still raging, and the storm inside the cabin, Victoria's storm, was reaching its crescendo. She thought she'd outplayed everyone. She thought a seat, a plane, an entire neighborhood were hers to manipulate. But storms have a way of exposing the truth, and hers was about to break wide open. The first rule of flying is to trust the airplane. Steel and rivets don't lie. But people will mislead you in 100 subtle ways if you're not careful. And right now, trapped in that cabin, it wasn't the storm outside I trusted, least it was the storm sitting right behind me, armed with a phone, a fake emergency, and a dangerous level of confidence. The descent grew harsher. Rain drummed the fuselage so loudly it was hard to hear anything else. Every few seconds, lightning splintered across the clouds, illuminating faces twisted with fear. The supposed patient moaned in the aisle, though his attack had lost its edge. He kept glancing at Victoria, as though waiting for cues. She, of course, didn't miss a beat, narrating his suffering to her live stream, painting herself as the only truth-teller on board. "Complete negligence," she whispered dramatically. "We're plummeting through a storm, and the crew is ignoring a dying man. Someone needs to answer for this." Her voice was a weapon slicing through the fragile calm the crew was trying to maintain. But I wasn't watching her. I was watching the bin. That cursed bin. Another pocket of turbulence struck, jolting the aircraft violently. The bin flexed again, a slight give and take that only I seemed to notice. And then I heard it, the tiniest click, a metallic sound swallowed almost instantly by the roar of the storm. My pulse spiked. I unbuckled and slid forward into the galley again. Maria's eyes locked on mine instantly. She didn't even need to ask. She grabbed the interphone, murmured in code, and within seconds, 2 attendants moved swiftly toward the back, carrying Sarah's tote like a live grenade. Passengers whispered nervously, craning their necks, but the attendants' calm performance softened the panic. One of them smiled tightly and said, "Just routine safety, folks," as if shuffling bags mid-flight was as normal as serving coffee. But the air marshal wasn't fooled. I caught him watching too, following every movement with hawk-like focus. His paperback sat forgotten on his seat. His posture was taut, coiled ready. That's when Victoria's phone shifted. She angled it toward the rear, capturing the attendants with Sarah's tote. "They're moving baggage in the middle of lightning," she gasped into her mic. "Utter incompetence. If we crash, you'll know why." I ground my teeth. She was spinning their professionalism into failure, twisting the narrative before the truth could breathe. The turbulence worsened, each jolt harder than the last. The seatbelt sign glowed fiercely overhead. I felt the flaps extend, heard the landing gear deploy with its familiar heavy thud. We were committed to landing in this mess. And that's when I spotted him again, the man with the ring. He'd been quiet in the back, but now his sharp features gleamed under a flash of lightning. He wasn't panicking like the rest. His eyes weren't on the storm or the crew, they were on the bag. The air marshal saw it too. His head tilted ever so slightly, acknowledging the predator in our midst. He stood adjusting his jacket as though stretching, but I knew better. He was moving into position. Meanwhile, Maria's voice whispered through the intercom again. "Cabin secure. Item placed LRBL. Awaiting cockpit." The relief in her tone was thin, fragile. They'd isolated the device at the rear galley door. If it went off, the damage would be less catastrophic. But less catastrophic was still catastrophic. The aircraft jolted violently, dropping hard enough to elicit screams from the cabin. Overhead bins rattled, loose items clattered, and then another sound. Louder this time, a snap of metal. My eyes shot to the bin at row 3. The latch had broken free. The door creaked open half an inch, swaying with the turbulence. Passengers gasped, pointing upward. For them, it was just luggage. For me, it was confirmation something dangerous had been planted. I pushed out of my seat, bracing against the aisle as the plane bucked. Maria's eyes widened, and she started toward the bin, but I was closer. I shoved it shut, pressing hard until I heard the latch click again. My palm stung from the impact. The woman across the aisle whispered shakily, "Thank you." I nodded, but inside my pulse hammered. The ringed man had planted something. The crew had removed one suspicious bag, but what if there were 2? I slid back into my seat, gripping the armrest. The storm outside screamed. The passengers held their breath. And behind me, Victoria whispered gleefully into her phone. "We're being tossed like rag dolls. This is the end." But it wasn't the end. Not yet. I knew enough to recognize the signs, the weight of tension before the final act. This wasn't random. This was a script written by people who thought they controlled the outcome. But storms, real storms, don't follow scripts. They tear them apart. The landing lights pierced the gray soup outside. The runway was close. The engines roared into full reverse thrust as the wheels slammed onto wet asphalt. A collective cry of relief rippled through the cabin, followed instantly by hushed confusion. Because we weren't taxiing to the terminal. We were rolling toward an isolated gate on the far side of the airport where emergency vehicles with flashing lights waited in the rain. Police cruisers, fire trucks, an ambulance. Their presence told the truth the cockpit knew. Ground control knew. This flight wasn't just diverted, it was compromised. And in that realization, I felt the storm inside me settle into ice-cold clarity. Victoria thought she had won. She thought she'd bent an entire aircraft to her will. But she had no idea the real reckoning was just beginning. When the tires finally bit into the slick runway, a collective breath seemed to leave the cabin all at once. Passengers clapped shakily, some muttered prayers of relief, and others simply slumped back into their seats as if gravity itself had doubled. But for me, there was no relief. The storm outside had been rough, yes, but the storm inside the aircraft was still gathering force. We weren't taxiing toward the bright, busy terminal where families would be waiting with balloons and coffee. Instead, the plane veered left, rolling toward a remote stand at the far edge of the airport. Through the rain-smeared window, I saw the strobing blue and red lights of emergency vehicles already in position. Airport police cruisers, a fire truck, even an ambulance. They knew. Somebody in the cockpit had tipped them off that this wasn't just a routine diversion. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm but clipped. "Ladies and gentlemen, remain seated with your belts fastened. For your safety, we'll be parking at a secure gate and deplaning once cleared by authorities." Those words landed heavy. Authorities. Passengers exchanged nervous looks. Some began whispering, others pulled out phones despite the seatbelt sign. And behind me, Victoria straightened in her seat, her smirk returning like a mask she couldn't wait to wear again. To her, this wasn't danger, it was triumph. She thought she was about to step off the plane and march straight into her emergency HOA meeting like a conquering queen. But then movement caught my eye. The man with the ring. He was rising from his seat in economy, pushing forward with sudden urgency. "Sorry, I've got a connection," he muttered, brushing past startled passengers. His voice was smooth, but his body language screamed desperation. He wasn't heading for baggage claim. He was making a break for it. The air marshal moved like a shadow sliding from row 14C with a fluidity that betrayed years of training. "Sir, return to your seat," he said firmly. His hand hovered just inside his jacket. His voice carried authority, but the man with the ring ignored it, shoving past the last row into the forward galley. I unbuckled without thinking. Instinct. The aisle between us was narrow, barely 10 feet. If the man tried to double back, I'd be there. The forward door cracked open with a metallic thud, the jet bridge sliding into place. Rain and flashing lights leaked into the cabin, and then chaos erupted. The man with the ring spun, cornered by the marshal. His hand darted inside his jacket and came out with something metallic, a knife. Small, thin, wickedly sharp, the kind of weapon designed for speed, not intimidation. "Stay back," he shouted, his voice ragged with panic. Passengers screamed. A baby wailed. The nurse from earlier shielded the patient, who now sat bolt upright, his performance suddenly forgotten. He wasn't a victim, he was an accomplice. The marshal didn't flinch. "Drop it," he commanded. His stance was solid, eyes locked, gun ready to clear leather in a blink. But the man didn't drop it. He lunged not at the marshal, but toward the gap in the jet bridge, desperate to vanish into the rain-soaked chaos outside. That was my moment. My roller bag sat at my feet, heavy with the essentials of any pilot's life. Headset manuals, spare uniform, 20 pounds of dense leverage. I yanked it up, pivoted, and slammed its hard corner into his wrist as he passed. The crack was sickening, the knife clattering to the floor with a metallic ring. He howled, stumbling. The marshal pounced. In a blur, the man was face first against the wall of the jet bridge, his arm twisted brutally behind him. Police surged forward from outside, seizing him, handcuffing him, dragging him down the bridge with ruthless efficiency. But before he disappeared, he spat his final venom back into the cabin, his eyes locked on Victoria, his voice hoarse with rage. "This was your plan. You set me up." The words hit like a thunderclap. The entire cabin, already buzzing with fear, turned as one toward Victoria. Phones rose, cameras clicked. For once, her live stream wasn't her weapon, it was her noose. Her smirk dissolved. Color drained from her face. She stammered, clutching her phone to her chest. "He's lying," she whispered. But the damage was done. The marshal scooped the knife into an evidence bag. Maria, steady, despite the storm of emotions, picked up the interphone and calmly informed the cockpit. Suspect detained, cabin secure. But secure wasn't the word I'd use. The atmosphere was electric, every passenger buzzing, every phone camera capturing the fall of Cedar Grove's self-appointed queen. Victoria tried to salvage it. She stood waving her hands, her voice high-pitched and trembling. "I was just documenting, I didn't know him." No one believed her. Not with his words echoing in the air, not with the fear she had fanned, not with the timing of the diversion that aligned perfectly with her HOA coup. The captain's voice returned sharper now. "Everyone remain seated. Law enforcement will be boarding momentarily." And sure enough, they did. Agents in dark suits with federal credentials stepped into the cabin, their presence silencing even the whispers. One of them, a woman with sharp eyes and an unreadable face, spoke clearly. "No one is to leave. This aircraft is now a federal crime scene." Her gaze swept the rows, landing finally on Victoria. "Ma'am, shut off your phone. Now." Victoria hesitated, clutching it tighter. "I have rights. This is a federal investigation." The agent cut her off, her tone like steel. "Turn it off or we'll seize it as evidence." For the first time all night, Victoria faltered. Her hands shook as she fumbled with the screen, the live stream blinking to black. And in that silence, in that charged stillness, every passenger knew the reign of Cedar Grove's queen was crumbling. The storm outside had finally passed, But the storm inside, that was just beginning to break wide open. The jet bridge echoed with the sound of rain hammering its roof as federal agents streamed on board. Their dark suits were soaked, but their expressions were sharp, professional, unyielding. The lead agent, tall, broad-shouldered, with a voice that could slice through steel, spoke clearly enough for every passenger to hear. "Remain seated. This is an active federal investigation." The cabin hushed. Even the most anxious passengers sat rigid, hands, folded eyes darting. And then, as though every spotlight in the world had swung toward her, Victoria shifted in her seat. Her phone lifeline of her false narrative now lay dark in her trembling hands. She tried to shrink into the upholstery, but the weight of 100 eyes pinned her down. The agent who'd ordered her phone off, Agent Miller, moved closer. She didn't raise her voice, didn't need to. "Victoria Harlow." Victoria swallowed hard. "Yes. I mean, what is this about? I'm a passenger, same as anyone here." But Miller had already seen enough. She gestured, and another agent dropped a heavy containment case onto an empty seat. Inside it was the device the crew had secured the suspicious tote. The lid snapped open, and with gloved hands, the agent revealed what I had feared: a high-powered RF jammer wires coiled like a nest of snakes. Gasps rippled through the cabin. Even without technical knowledge, the passengers recognized danger when they saw it. This, Miller said evenly, was planted to disrupt communications during landing. Not enough to bring a plane down, but enough to sow confusion to force a diversion. She turned eyes drilling into Victoria. "And it was purchased with a card tied directly to Oak Valley Holdings. Does that name mean anything to you?" Victoria's face drained white. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't even know those people." But the man with the ring had already shouted the truth. The live stream she thought was her shield was now a gallery of evidence against her. And she didn't know the half of it. Because right then my phone buzzed. Emily again. This time not just a message, a flood. Screenshots of HOA meeting chat logs, bank records, even a catering invoice for a victory party scheduled that very night. And the names on every receipt, every booking, every paper trail led back to one, addressed the HOA's official P.O. box. I stood slowly, catching Miller's eye. "You'll want to see this," I said, my voice low but steady. She took the phone, scrolled, and with each flick of her finger, her expression darkened. Finally, she zoomed in on the photo Emily had forwarded Victoria that very morning, caught on a neighbor's security camera, shaking hands with the man with the ring. Miller exhaled slowly, then turned to her team. "That ties it with a bow. Arrest her." The words cracked through the cabin like lightning. 2 officers stepped forward, their cuffs glinting under the fluorescent lights. Victoria shot to her feet, panic flooding her voice. "No, this is a mistake. I was just trying to help that sick man." She gestured desperately toward her accomplice in the aisle. He averted his eyes, silent now that his role was useless. Passengers raised their phones higher, recording the moment. Some whispered curses under their breath, others muttered finally. I saw one grandmother cross herself. The cabin wasn't just witnessing an arrest, it was witnessing justice. The metallic click of handcuffs locking around Victoria's wrists was louder than the storm outside. She flinched, gasped, then twisted to face the phones. "This is harassment, I'll sue every one of you," but no one flinched. Not Brenda, the gate agent who'd endured her entitlement, not the crew who'd risked everything to contain the device, not the passengers who had been unwilling extras in her power play, and certainly not me. Agent Miller recited the charges: conspiracy to interfere with a flight crew, endangering the safety of an aircraft, federal fraud. Each one landed like a hammer blow. Victoria's knees buckled, and for a moment I thought she might collapse. But the officers on either side held her steady, guiding her toward the jet bridge. The reaction inside the cabin was instantaneous. Applause thundered, spontaneous and fierce. Passengers clapped, whistled, even shouted. Relief poured out in sound, raw and unstoppable. I sat back, letting the noise wash over me. Not because I needed applause, I wasn't the hero. The real heroes were the crew, the marshal, the agents who had acted with calm precision, but I couldn't deny the deep satisfaction in seeing Victoria finally shackled by rules she couldn't bend. As she was marched down the jet bridge, still spitting threats about lawyers and retaliation, I caught her eyes one last time. For the first time since I'd known her, there was no smugness, no superiority, only fear. The storm outside had broken the worst of the turbulence behind us. But for Victoria, the real turbulence was only beginning. And for Cedar Grove, the neighborhood she'd ruled like a tyrant, dawn was coming. The captain's voice came once more, steadier, now relief bleeding through. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We'll begin deplaning shortly, row by row. Please follow crew instructions." I looked around the cabin. People were smiling, some even laughing nervously, tears of relief glistening. Phones buzzed with notifications as the story already began spreading online. The takedown of an HOA queen captured live by dozens of witnesses. But for me, the night wasn't over. Because Emily's messages told me the HOA meeting was still in session. And without its queen, the entire empire of corruption was about to collapse. I leaned back, staring at the rain, streaking the window, and whispered to myself, sometimes justice doesn't wait for the ground. Sometimes it lands at 30,000 feet. By the time my shoes touched the wet tarmac outside the aircraft, the adrenaline had started to wear off. My arms ached from catching the service cart, and my shoulder throbbed from the hit I'd taken with my roller bag. But exhaustion was a luxury I couldn't afford yet. Because this wasn't just about a plane or a diversion or even Victoria's arrest. This was about home. The airport staff guided us into a secured lounge where coffee and bottled water were handed out by the dozen. Passengers slumped into seats, phoning relatives, replaying the clips they had captured. Already the internet was buzzing, half the cabin had live-streamed parts of the chaos. Within hours, Victoria's meltdown would be viral. But the story wasn't finished. Emily was waiting outside security. She rushed to me the second I emerged, rain still dripping from her coat hood. I dropped my bag and pulled her close, inhaling the scent of damp wool and home. For a long moment, I didn't care about anything else. "You did it," she whispered, pulling back to study me. Her eyes were fierce proud. "They arrested her. It's all over the news already." I shook my head. "Not yet. The meeting's still going, isn't it?" Her jaw tightened. "Yes. They're trying to ram through the vote even without her. The developer's still there telling everyone the deal is done." That lit a fire in me stronger than anything I'd felt on the plane. I wasn't just a pilot tonight. I was a homeowner, a neighbor, a man with something worth fighting for. "Let's finish this," I said. The community clubhouse was only 20 minutes away. We drove through streets slick with rain, headlights carving tunnels through the night. My mind replayed everything: the ringed man, the planted jammer, Victoria's smug smile, the terrified faces of the passengers. They had endangered 180 lives for a zoning variance. That thought hardened into rage. When we pulled into the clubhouse lot, it was packed. Cars lined the street, headlights still on neighbors spilling onto the steps. The storm had driven people inside, but their voices carried angry, confused, desperate for answers. Emily grabbed my hand as we pushed through the crowd. Inside, the room was chaos. The developer stood at the front, his suit, damp hair slicked back like he owned the place. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's be reasonable," he was saying, voice oily. "The variance is already approved in spirit. Karen, excuse me, Miss Harlow, will be here shortly to formalize the vote." "Wrong," someone shouted from the back. Phones buzzed, and suddenly dozens of screens lit up showing the breaking news. Victoria's arrest at the airport, cuffs glinting under fluorescent lights. Gasps rippled through the room. The developer froze, color draining from his face. He stammered, tried to laugh it off. "That can't be fake news, a misunderstanding," but the tide had turned. My neighbor Mike, the retired accountant Victoria, once fined for a garden gnome, rose from his seat. His voice was steady, strong. "According to our bylaws, any board member facing felony charges can be removed by vote of no confidence. We remove Victoria Harlow as president of this HOA, effective immediately." A chorus of voices seconded it. The vote was called. Hands shot up across the room, unanimous. Cheers erupted, echoing through the rafters. The developer backed toward the door, his bravado crumbling. Someone shouted, "Get him out!" and the crowd surged. He bolted, fleeing into the rain. His empire, like Victoria's, was collapsing before his eyes. Mike was named interim president on the spot. His first act was simple, decisive. The zoning variance will be tabled until all homeowners receive paper ballots. No secret votes, no midnight ambushes. Transparency from this day forward. Applause thundered again, louder this time, filled with relief. For the first time in years, Cedar Grove felt like a community, not a kingdom under siege. I sat beside Emily, finally letting my body sink into the chair. Neighbors patted my shoulder, murmured thanks, called me brave. But I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a man who had simply refused to look away. Because the truth is, defending your home doesn't always look like standing guard at your property line. Sometimes it means noticing a wrong click in an overhead bin. Sometimes it means catching a runaway service cart before it kills a child. And sometimes it means standing up to the person who thinks rules are weapons instead of protections. As the meeting adjourned, I stepped outside into the rain-soaked night. The storm clouds were breaking, revealing stars above. Emily slipped her arm around my waist, resting her head on my shoulder. "It's over," she murmured. I stared down our quiet street, imagining it free from her tyranny, imagining barbecues, without fear of fines, kids' bikes left on lawns, without letters of complaint. For the first time in years, it felt possible. Yeah, I said softly, pulling Emily closer. It's over. But deep down I knew the truth, it wasn't just over. It was the beginning of something better. That night taught me something I'll never forget. Power built on fear is fragile. Victoria used rules like blades cutting down neighbors to keep herself tall. But when she tried to take her arrogance beyond the cul-de-sac, when she gambled with human lives for her own gain, her empire collapsed in the span of a single evening. The lesson is simple, but it runs deep. Pay attention. Pay attention to the details, the small, wrong clicks, the subtle signs that something isn't right. Pay attention to the people who abuse power, because silence only fuels them. And pay attention to the community around you, because when neighbors stand together, no tyrant can hold. So if you've ever faced a Victoria in your life, an entitled voice trying to drown out everyone else, remember, storms pass, but truth remains. And sometimes justice comes with the sound of applause in the rain. Share your thoughts below. Have you ever had to stand up to someone who thought they were untouchable? And don't forget, subscribe for more stories where karma, justice, and community always find their way.